Almost 200 years ago, in Germany, in Bonn, an attractive town near Cologne, there came into the world on the 16th of December, as the snow was falling, a child who would become the greatest musician of all time, a man who would turn music into a limitless, universal art. This man was Beethoven. His character, a mixture of rages and impetuosity, of delicacy and tenderness, made him write music in the way that medieval architects used to build their cathedrals, reaching to the hearts of men, but feeling very near to God. They called him the Spaniard because of his olive skin and deep dark eyes, and above all because of his temperament, impulsive, daring, and nothing like his compatriots. Beethoven had to put up with a troublesome heritage, which influenced so much of the rest of his life: a consumptive mother who would die young, and an alcoholic and abusive father whose professed faith was that learning comes best with punishment. He was obsessed by the example of the young Mozart, who a few years before had passed through Bonn, amazing everybody with his improvisations and performances. He wanted to create another such in his son Ludwig, forcing him to practice for hours and hours on the spinet, even tying him to it on more than one occasion. The Beethoven family house, which escaped so many bombings and still survives in Bonn, was, or rather is, a garret of low ceilings and limited space. Here the parents, 3 or 4 children, instruments, scores, etc., all piled in together. It was a sad house, intensely sad, only disturbed by the studies of the son or the regular shouts of the father, who, after a day's work in the Archduke's chapel, would return home the worse for drink. After a lot of problems, a lot of shouting and of punishment, Beethoven was becoming technically adept, and had acquired a sufficient understanding of musical composition to allow him, still a child, to enter the service of the Prince Archduke as organist. In this way he was able to contribute to the maintenance of his family with a wage that drink couldn't squander in quite so noticeable a way. In this sad childhood and adolescence there is some light. It's the kind and gentle light of the family home of the Breunings, people from the best of Bonn society. Here the young musician will become teacher to the children, and in a very short time will be accepted as another of their sons. Beethoven teaches music to the daughter and receives in turn classes on behaviour and much-needed good manners. His character begins to develop. A bit taciturn, a little proud, with sudden and unexpected flashes of bad temper, even brief rages, which sometimes cause him to leave that much-loved house, to which he would always return with noble remorse. Soon he will experience his first love, finding himself irresistibly attracted to Leonora. Leonora loves Beethoven like a brother, and she makes him understand this. It's his first disillusion in love, but friendship with her and her brother will last the whole of his life. We know of the touching detail that when Beethoven died, a yellowing letter from Leonora would be found in the pocket of an old jacket. In the letter, a still adolescent Leonora tells him that she's sending him a scarf made by herself to stop him catching cold in freezing Vienna. Beethoven settled, finally, in the Austrian capital after a variety of difficulties. His talent, indeed his originality, open the salons of important people to him, and his German uncouthness and provincial tastes adapt to the refinements of Viennese aristocracy. He begins to go about in society. He's almost elegant in his dress. He learns to ride and even goes so far as to take some dance lessons. He teaches in the best society, is well received everywhere. He achieves great success as a pianist and conductor. But the terrible drama of his life is about to unfold. It will change his character, exacerbating and intensifying those innate aspects that have already been referred to. That drama, deafness. He's barely 25 years old, just beginning to enjoy his first triumphs as a composer, when he begins to notice the early symptoms of what will become an inexorably progressive deafness. At first it's just buzzings, then noises, and even worse for a musician, sounds become distorted. Beethoven's terrified. However, it's also one of the best times for him as the beautiful Countess Giulietta comes into his life. Beethoven even forgets the illness that stalks him implacably, but the terrible and sudden abandonment of him by his beloved pupil Giulietta and the definitive worsening of his illness plunge him into despair. He even tries to take his own life. He's now little more than 30 years old, and music is on the point of losing one of its greatest geniuses. But faith in his art and the conviction that he has something important to say make him abandon that idea. Slowly, Beethoven draws apart from Viennese society. Little by little, he retires into himself. He becomes more withdrawn, but his music gains in inspiration, in depth. We can imagine how it must feel for a musician in full flood to find himself almost deprived of the faculty of hearing. Standing only a short distance from the orchestra, he cannot perceive its harmonies, and he confuses its sounds. Gradually, the illness gets worse, and he ends up stone deaf. Beethoven shuts himself up in his house once and for all. In his final years, the few friends who visit him have to write down their questions and his replies, and thus we have the famous conversation notebooks. Beethoven lives only for music. Although he's lost the ability to hear, his inner ear, fortunately, is even more acute. It's quite extraordinary that a musician who is completely deaf can extend, and in such a fashion, the sound world of the piano, of the violin, and can create a new concept of the orchestra, one that is starting to learn how to describe, to paint pictures. The music of Beethoven, undoubtedly because of his intense concentration, because of the absolute silence around him, becomes full of a new internal imagery, drawn from the very depths of his being. He hears music in a strange, unearthly way. You could say that he contemplates it rather than hears it. From this comes his pleasure in counterpoint, in fugues, in the taut, almost ecstatic dialogues of the quartet, in the interweaving of phrases. He sinks into and draws out the pure essence of themes in an exhaustive elaboration of form that comes from detailed investigation of a thematic formula. The last sonatas, the last quartets, are all a renunciation of life and love, all a surrendering of himself to his art. And as a wonderful contrast, the Ninth Symphony, the greatest hymn to joy and love among men who will one day love each other as brothers. Whatever might have been the beauty of the music created by a Beethoven open to the outside world, there is no doubt he would not have achieved the same depths nor the emotional beauty based on the serenity of contemplating the phenomenon of his inner hearing. In his work there's no guessing at sounds. He knows how to listen, and he hears the music from within through a filter, for otherwise he could not have composed at all. But this remarkable gift modified his composing, changed his music, and his message became different, coming to us from afar, almost from another world.